Hello, welcome to week 5 of the Lifestyle Medicine Master Series. This week's topic, Fueled by Connection. My name is Christy Barron. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and one of the behavioral science faculty at North Colorado Family Medicine in Greeley, Colorado. Today we have 3 main learning objectives. First, to understand the meaning of loneliness and its prevalence in our society. 2, to be able to describe the negative effects of loneliness. And 3, to learn how to combat loneliness in our lives and the lives of ones we love. You may be asking yourself, why is this important? Why do I need to learn about loneliness? Well, research shows us that the single most important predictor of human happiness and long life is having strong social connections. You may remember from week 2, we discussed relationships, or the R in PERMA, as being one of the important building blocks of well-being and achieving happiness. Now let's take a few minutes to describe the difference between being alone versus being lonely. Take a look at this list. I bet you can think of lots of other things in addition to what's listed here that you like to do by yourself, that you really enjoy. Just doing things by yourself are not negative or bad in any way. If you enjoy doing activities alone, then great, keep doing it. Most of us are so busy with work, kids, family, and other responsibilities that we don't get a lot of alone time, and when we do, we cherish it. So then, what does it mean to be lonely? Loneliness is the feeling of being alone regardless of the amount of social contact you have. There are people out there in the world that live alone and don't have a whole lot of social connections, but they don't feel lonely at all. Loneliness is defined by people's level of satisfaction with their connectedness or their perceived social isolation. It can also be defined as the gap between the social connections that you would like to have and those you feel like you're actually experiencing in your life. And the truth is, some people can feel lonely even though they have a multitude of social connections. Well, you may be asking yourself, is this really a problem? Is this something I need to worry about? I'm not lonely. Well, in 2017, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the U.S. Surgeon General at the time, called loneliness a public health epidemic. In 2018, the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 22% of U.S. adults said they often or always felt lonely or socially isolated. Cigna conducted another study in 2019, and they found that 61% of Americans reported feeling lonely. And most recently, that pandemic thing, what about COVID? How has that impacted people's loneliness or feelings of being socially isolated? I'm sure you have your own story or can at least relate to what it might feel like to feel lonely or isolated at some point in your life. Who is at increased risk of being socially isolated? The LGBTQ community, the elderly, immigrants, people with disabilities, and adolescents. People in all of these groups are at increased risk of being lonely or socially isolated. What do you think all of these groups of people have in common? Can you think of others? So here are some contributing factors or things that people in all of the groups we spoke about on the previous slide might have in common. Language barriers, family dynamics, differences in community, stigma, discrimination, illness or injury, and just being physically isolated. We all feel lonely from time to time. It can occur during transitions in life, such as divorce, moving to a new place, or the death of a loved one. Researchers refer to this as reactive loneliness. Usually over time, the feeling of loneliness subsides as we build new connections and start to feel more comfortable in our new situation. But when loneliness becomes chronic, it can be excruciating. Chronic loneliness is most likely to set in when individuals either don't have the emotional, mental, or financial resources to get out and satisfy their social needs, or they lack a social circle that can provide these benefits. This is when the negative consequences of loneliness set in. Next, we're going to talk about some of the negative consequences of loneliness. The first negative consequence is premature death. A 2019 study led by Dr. Cassandra Alcaraz, a public health researcher with the American Cancer Society, analyzed data from more than 580,000 adults and found that social isolation increases the risk of premature death from every cause for every race. Can loneliness be as harmful to you as smoking? Well, according to a meta-analysis co-authored by Dr. Juliana Holt-Lundstad, professor of psychology and neuroscience at Brigham Young University, lack of social connection heightens health risks as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having alcohol use disorder. She's also found that loneliness and social isolation are twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity. What about heart disease? A 2016 study led by Newcastle University epidemiologist Dr. Nicole Valtorta linked loneliness to a 30% increase in risk of stroke or the development of coronary heart disease. Also, the more lonely you've been over your life, the more likely you are to have high blood pressure and/or high cholesterol. Finally, loneliness among heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death, a 68% increased risk of hospitalization, and a 57% increased risk of emergency department visits. Another negative consequence of loneliness is a decrease in mental sharpness. Your ability to solve problems or remember things as you age is likely to be affected if you feel lonely. A 2018 study conducted at the Florida State University College of Medicine found that loneliness is associated with a 40% increase in a person's risk of dementia. Experiencing loneliness can also have a negative effect on your body's immune system. A 2015 study led by Dr. Stephen Cole, a professor of medicine at UCLA, found that the leukocytes, the white blood cells that play key roles in the body's response to infection, of lonely participants showed an increased expression of genes involved in inflammation and a decreased expression of genes involved in antiviral responses. Basically, what this says is people who feel lonely have less immunity and more inflammation than people who don't. How can being lonely affect your mental health? Well, this may not be a surprise to you, but loneliness is also associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Finally, another negative consequence of loneliness can be substance abuse. The more lonely you are, the more likely you are to abuse alcohol, tobacco, or other substances. You might get a false sense of feeling better, but it doesn't last, and over time, it can cause serious damages. So now you're probably asking yourself, now that I've learned all about the negative consequences of loneliness, what can I do to help make sure my loved ones aren't lonely and to look out for the signs of loneliness in myself? Well, good thing you tuned in because I'm going to tell you. Here are a few tips you can use to help your loved ones that might be experiencing loneliness. First, pay attention. Is your teenager spending way more time on social media than they should be and less time with others? Is your aging relative staying at home more, declining offers to go out to coffee with friends? Are they experiencing sleep problems or a lack of appetite? Pay attention. Next, reach out. Many times our loved ones will not tell us that they're lonely as they don't want to be a burden or they don't want to bother us. Also, some people even feel that being lonely is related to some inadequacy or deficiency on their own part. Make the first move. Reach out. Talk about stuff. Next, help improve their connections. Sometimes people just need help learning how to connect with others. The elderly especially aren't usually very tech savvy, and sometimes as a result they might feel socially isolated. Introduce them to FaceTime, video chats, have Zoom meetings with them. Schedule play dates for your kids. Next, promote physical activity. Take your loved ones to the park, go to the museum, go for a hike. Get moving. This is good for you too. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that physical activity also is really great for your mental health. And finally, talk to people. Are you concerned about your child? Talk to their teacher or a school counselor. Worried about grandma? Talk to her neighbor or her home care worker. The people that are in touch with your loved ones on a regular basis may have some really good insight for you. Now, here are some things that you can do to help combat loneliness for yourself. First, again, pay attention. Pay attention to yourself. Are you isolating more than usual? Do you actually feel lonely? Are you avoiding connecting with others? Take care of yourself. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, eating regularly, and being physically active. Next, get a pet. Research shows that people who live with pets feel less lonely, and they're a lot of fun too. Third, be there for those who need you. Be a good friend. Return that call or text message. Be excited about what others are doing in their lives. Fourth, be social. Find a social group that is interesting to you, like a book club. Join a gym. Volunteer. Participate in a faith-based activity. Take a class or join a support group. Make it a point to be social on a regular basis. This doesn't mean that you have to do something with other people every single day. Schedule calls with extended family members who live far away. Have a monthly girls' lunch or a happy hour with friends. Fifth, consider co-housing. If you live alone, maybe getting a roommate might be a good idea. It also might help alleviate some financial stress. Next, get out there. Get out and do stuff. Be active. Go for a walk, a hike, go to the museum, take a trip, go for a bike ride. And finally, ask for help. Consider talking with a professional if you feel like your loneliness is a little overwhelming. This week's action item is something that you can do right away to help combat loneliness. Set a SMART goal. What does being smart mean? Well, some of you may already know this, but a SMART goal is specific, measurable, attainable or achievable, realistic, and timely. So first, be specific. What am I specifically going to do to improve my feelings of connectedness with others? Next, how will I measure it? How will I know if I'm successful or making progress? Next, is this something that's actually attainable? Do I have what it takes to follow through with this goal? Next, is it realistic? What am I actually capable of? Shoot for improvement over perfection. And finally, is it timely? how frequent am I going to have to work on this? And how long do I actually need to commit? Well, I hope you've all enjoyed today's presentation. If you're interested in learning more about maintaining and improving social connections, as well as combating loneliness, here are a few books that you might want to check out. Brene Brown's Braving the Wilderness, Dr. Vivek Murthy, I spoke about earlier, the former Surgeon General of the United States, his book Together. The book Lonely as a Goldfish by Karen Moe focuses on combating loneliness for senior citizens. Adam Pozwalski's Friendship in the Age of Loneliness. And finally, Dr. David Narang's Leaving Loneliness, a Workbook. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today to talk about loneliness and social connections. Finally, here are a few websites, YouTube videos, and TED Talks that you can check out if you're interested in learning more. Thank you again for participating in our Lifestyle Medicine Master Series. I hope you'll join us next week for week 6 when our topic is mindful and intuitive eating.